As you can see, today I'm at Fairbrook in the High Peak, which is just south of the old Snake Inn on the A57. Has the promise of being quite a long scramble because it runs from the River Ashop all the way up onto the top of the Kinder Plateau, with a promise of a mix of wet and dry scrambles, waterfalls and also boulders. The National Trust sign and this here large sycamore tree mark the start of Fairbrook, but as you can see it's pretty flat for much of the first part, so only makes sense to walk along the path that runs to the right of the brook. The brook is pretty enough in this first section, the water tumbling down over a series of steps, but only about knee deep at this point. Here's the first point that you might consider getting in. The brook has been dammed to create what runs up to be a waist-deep pool and a very easy 4 foot or so waterfall that you can just walk straight up. That first pool and waterfall are about 10 minutes or so from the start of the brook, and above it a further series of maybe 2, 3, 4 foot waterfalls with pools below, knee deep, sometimes a little bit more than that, sometimes deliberately dammed in order to create a pool. And the water at the moment is quite fresh, even though it's supposedly midsummer. A unique feature of Fairbrook is that it is the only place I have ever seen anybody else actually scrambling up a brook. In this case it was a commercial operation taking a family on a day out, and you can see why, because there are pools that kids could jump into in the first part. It's a real beginner's practice route at the start. Here's a little waterfall that again would be a good bit of practice. It's, I don't know, grade a quarter or half, something like that. Easy to get up to before what may be potentially more difficult terrain ahead. Another reason that this first bit of Fairbrook makes a good introduction, something for all the family, is the surface underneath. As you might be able to see, it's either scoured gritstone or pebbles, and therefore good grip. Here's yet another swim pool in a lovely sylvan setting. Because it's dammed, it doesn't matter to the water level that it hasn't rained very much recently, though the water is definitely cold. A full wetsuit would not go amiss even in summer. 3 cloughs run off to the left of Fairbrook as you're going up. First Nether Seal Clough, then Middle Seal Clough. This is the most obvious of the split points. This is Upper Seal Clough going up here, and you want to continue to the right with Fairbrook. For the first few minutes after the split, the brook is flat and boring, and there's only the vaguest of paths running along the side here. In fact, you might be tempted to try and climb up to the main path, which is quite some way above. But if you had done that, you would then be missing out on this, which is our first proper waterfall, I would say, some 10 to 12 feet tall from a decent depth of pool. This and the previous waterfall are perfect grade 1 fare. Easy enough to get up, but you have to think where you're putting your feet, a little bit slippery in places, and enough of a challenge to make them worthwhile. I'm now about halfway along Fairbrook, and it is narrowed somewhat, but with a mix of either thickly moss-covered rocks or gritstone underneath. It's pretty easy going. Quite a delight compared to some of the more slippery brooks, cloughs that I've been scrambling up. In what might be called the third quartile of Fairbrook, its character has changed quite a bit. It's a lot narrower, a lot shallower. Doesn't really make much sense to be in the brook at this point, which appears to be something of a transition section as we move up to the final, probably drier, but also steeper part. This third section of Fairbrook is worth bypassing. Relatively easy to do because there's a vague kind of path that runs alongside it. Come up here, there might be some kind of an exception. There's a waterfall about 6 feet high, but it's got two problems. First of all, it's somewhat overhung, and secondly, no steps, as a result of which you might well end up pulling out clumps of vegetation as you try to climb up. So I think that also is worth just skirting around up here to the side. I'm now at the turn off for Fair Brook Gully, the dry scramble that runs off to the left of the main Fairbrook. For the past half a kilometre or so, I've actually been walking up the brook because it's very easy going thanks to the nice surface underneath, and we'll probably carry on in the brook again for this final section until we get to the point up there where the boulders appear. It gets steeper, and I'm assuming it's also going to be a dry scramble. Up there is Fairbrook Naze on the right of this, the final section of Fairbrook. You can see there's still some kind of a watercourse, but it looks to be characterised more by massive boulders to be worked over rather than waterfalls and brooks to be scrambled up. This is the Fairbrook boulder field. Yeah, you need to pick a line through it, but unfortunately none of the boulders are really big enough that you can do anything like bouldering on them. None of them that you think, oh, how am I going to get up that one? Because they're only about 3 or 4 feet high. So you just hop onto them, hop round them. Nothing here then that's unfortunately terribly engaging. The boulder field was maybe a little better than I had initially thought, because yeah, you do need to think about the line you're taking. It then leads us up to the Kinder exclusion fence and the final part of Fairbrook leading up to the top of the plateau, which looks to be more of the same, dry, probably smaller boulders, so straightforward. And this is the top of Fairbrook. That last section was unfortunately a bit of a letdown. There were a couple of bits of clambering required, but the water is brown, brackish and uninviting. The rocks are ugly, streaked with algae, spotted with lichen, and overall nothing terribly inviting about that last bit. So that was Fairbrook. Definitely some positives about it. The gritstone, the moss, pebbles, sand even in places meant that it was really pretty grippy underfoot, and so it was quite easy to walk along, unlike some cloughs like I mentioned. And unlike some other cloughs, it was only 10 minutes or so from the car park, so pretty easy to access the start point. And it does have a mix of different kinds of scrambling. But I guess I was left a little bit disappointed because I probably thought that the initial section was just a taster for something much better to come, which would be the boulder scrambling up to the plateau. And ultimately that really wasn't very challenging or very interesting. It was very definitely sub grade 1. So I think if I was going to come back again, if I was going to sum up overall, I would say that it's the first section that's the really good bit. Those wild swimming pools, those plunge pools, those waterfalls in that lovely wooded setting, that you know, 2 decent grade 1 waterfalls to climb up. So I think if I was bringing someone again, I would probably just do that bit, and I don't think it's really worth going along to those further sections, the further sections with the brook and the further sections, this final bits with the boulders and the dry elements. So rating just that first bit of Fairbrook alone, I think I'm going to say 7 out of 10 as an introductory scramble. A quick coda to say that if you want to do a wet plus a dry introductory scramble, then rather than doing the first part of Fairbrook and then the upper part of Fairbrook, better combination would be the first part of Fairbrook and then walk across and do Nether Red Brook, because the dry scramble for Nether Red Brook is far superior to that for Fairbrook.
Post-coda, here's a map of the route. Blue for the walk out and back to the lay-bys for parking on the A57. Red for the whole scramble, though I recommend getting out at some point after the 2 Grade 1 waterfalls. Further details are given in the text description underneath the video.